Hi, it's Mrs. Stanley, and this is the very first AP Macroeconomics lecture video. Your textbook is very simple to read, but you'll find that as things get more complicated, the lectures in class will really help to make the book make more sense and to give you kind of more in-depth explanation of things. So if you are absent and want to hear the lecture that we had in class, or if you were in class and just want to hear this again as a test review, I will put all of these videos for every module that we do on the class website. So feel free throughout the year to go to the class website, look at the modules you need. You can pause the videos if you need more time to write notes. They can be rewound, whatever you need. I hope these help you. A lot of students who take economics think that economics is all about money. It's all about numbers. And really, it's actually a lot more broad of a subject than just that. So economics is about limited resources and unlimited wants. One of the first vocab words you're going to learn in this class is scarcity. So you can see that economics is how individuals and entire societies and nations deal with scarcity. If things are scarce, that means that you have limited resources and unlimited wants. And we're going to study how individuals and societies make choices based on those limiting factors. So, some of these examples here. With your money, you might choose between buying jeans or shoes. So that's a small scale economic decision. Businesses must also decide how many people to hire. Do you want to hire fewer workers that are more skilled and cost you more, or do you want to hire a lot of unskilled workers? On a larger scale, governments have to choose what they want to do with all of their tax revenue. What can we spend things on? What are we not going to be able to spend things on? Do we need to raise taxes, cut spending, etc.? So economics is really about decision making and choices because we have limited resources and unlimited wants. Your resources are not just money. These also include things like time. That's another very valuable resource that you have to decide because you don't have an unlimited amount. There are two different branches of economics. I just told you about economic decision making because of scarcity, that we have limited resources but unlimited wants. Both of the branches of economics deal with scarcity. So we have microeconomics and macroeconomics. Micro, as the name implies, is small. So the question about what you're going to do with your money, will you buy jeans or shoes? So that was a microeconomic decision that deals with individuals. The next word that I want to point out here is firms. Firms are what economists use instead of saying businesses. So we're not talking about law firms. If you see firms, firms just means businesses in general. So the question about businesses and hiring, that's a microeconomic question because it's about firms. The next big word that you're going to see all year is aggregates. So I'll explain that one in a minute. Okay, so macroeconomics is big. It is the economy as a whole. So this is about governments, international trade, something that affects all of America, unemployment, inflation. So aggregates, this word that I badly circled, sorry about that. Aggregates, that word means overall. It means total. So if I ask you a small scale question, it's going to be micro. If I ask you about something that is about the economy as a whole, on the aggregate, that will be about macroeconomics. You are in macroeconomics, so that's going to be our focus. What we start learning about, general supply and demand, will be microeconomics. If we're looking at the supply and demand of apples, that's just one industry, that's micro, not a nationwide issue. So we're going to start with the small basics, but most of the class we're going to be focusing on large scale, we're in macroeconomics. You just learned about microeconomics and macroeconomics. So let's go ahead and practice. There are no trick questions. Each of these things is either micro or macro. So please take a moment, write what you think the right answers are. Then when you're done, we'll go back over and check your answers. So please pause the video and answer each of these questions. Okay, all ready? So the first one, individual markets for specific goods. Does that sound small or big? Does that sound like micro or macro? It's microeconomics. The next question, the behavior of firms or companies and consumers. Does that sound like small scale or large scale? Would it be micro or macro? It is macro. Now you might say, wait, didn't we just see that firms were on the micro side? Yes, but here's the difference. If the individual businesses for, say, bananas in that last example, if they're acting a certain way, that's micro. But if all businesses are hiring more workers and unemployment is down, that's macro. If all consumers are buying more products, that's on a large scale, that's macro. So the behaviors of them on a broad scale, all of the consumers, all of the businesses, that's macro. I'm always going to have a few tricky ones in here. Next question, national markets as opposed to individual markets above. That one is macro, it's national. Okay. Next one, economic growth and development. That's macro. So normally we're talking about an entire country growing and developing, so macro scale. International trade. Again, macro. That is an entire country trading with another country, large scale. Next one, supply and demand. Now you might think that that is both, but it's not. So we're going to learn about simple supply and demand early in the year of an individual product. Supply and demand of basketballs. That's micro because it's just one product. If we're looking at overall supply and demand and the total economy, we're going to use that word I just showed you, aggregate. So if you see aggregate supply and aggregate demand, those are overall, that makes it macro. But without that word aggregate, supply and demand is micro. Okay, interest rates and central banks. What do you think? A little harder? This one is macro because the central bank is like the Federal Reserve. It is for the entire country. Interest rates, everyone pays the same. You might not qualify for the lowest interest if you have bad credit, but if interest rates go down, they go down for the country as a whole. That's what makes this macro. And the last example, allocation of land, labor, and capital resources. That one is macro. So we're going to look at these things on a large scale. How is labor distributed? How is land distributed? Does the nation control it? What about large resources? So hopefully this is a good practice for you on micro and macro. There are two main types of economic analysis. These are major categories of how we look at economics. So you can look at it in terms of how things are or how they should be, how in your opinion you'd like them to be. So the two major categories are positive economics and normative economics. The mistake a lot of students make is seeing the word positive and thinking, oh, positive means good. Not in this case. Positive economics are factual. They're the way the economy actually is at this moment. So a little trick to remember positive economics is if you tell someone a fact about the economy and they ask you, are you sure? And the answer is, yes, I'm positive. So there you go. Positive economics. It's a fact. Normative economics is the other major category. Normative economics are opinions. So this is a value judgment, how you think the economy should be. So anytime you see the word should, or the sentence that you're reading is about an opinion, we should raise taxes, we should spend more money on the nation's schools, we should raise military spending. Those are all normative economics. Those are examples of opinions, value judgments. A little trick here is, what is Norm's opinion? Those are normative economics. Now that you've learned the difference between positive and normative economics, please read the next two statements and determine which one is a positive economic statement and which one is a normative economic statement. So the first statement reads, society should take measures to prevent people from buying homes they can't afford. Is that a fact or is that an opinion? That is an opinion. It says society should. So which of these two is about value judgments and opinions? Normative economics. So the first statement is normative. Big N. Okay, statement number 2. People who buy homes they can't afford impose higher costs on society if they walk away from their investments. So, people buying homes they can't afford. This might sound like a judgment that people shouldn't buy things they can't afford, but the statement doesn't say it. It's just saying people who do this are imposing higher costs on society. That is a positive economic statement. So even though it's a bad thing, it's a fact. Positive economics, remember, doesn't need to be good, it just needs to be factual. I mentioned the word scarcity at the beginning of these notes, so here we're going to talk a little bit more about it. Scarcity is huge in economics. There's almost always a question on the AP exam about scarcity, and it's a pretty simple concept. Scarcity is a problem for all societies because everywhere you go, wants are greater than resources. So the resources that you have might be financial, might be how much money you have, but you have other resources too. The amount of friends that you have to help you out when you need to move. That might be a limited resource, and you might have unlimited wants. The amount of time that you have, if you need to sleep and study and hang out with your friends and you want to do an unlimited amount of things, your wants are unlimited and they outweigh your resources, your limited time. So scarcity applies to two different major categories in economics: goods and services. Goods are always easier to think about because goods are physical objects. Anything that you buy or that nations produce, those tend to be goods. Services are a little bit harder, a little bit more abstract, because services are actions that are performed by nations, by individuals. So I am performing a service for you right now of teaching. If you tutor your friend in this subject, then you are also providing a service, especially if you charge them for it. Cleaning, cooking, there's some other examples. Hospitality and tourism are some major macroeconomic services. So I want you to think about scarcity in terms of how it affects your high school. So please get with a partner. You guys can take a break to, instead of stop writing notes, switch over to the back and start filling out this chart on limits or scarcity at this school. We talked previously about resources. Resources are a large category of things that can be used to produce goods and services. Resources are not just financial. We mentioned time, labor, your friends. You have other resources that are not just money. In economics, we break the resources into 4 major categories or factors of production, which are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Please do not write these big in each of those boxes. We're going to have notes on all 4 categories, so go ahead and write the title land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship, and then leave some space for us to fill in the rest. As you're taking notes on the 4 factors of production, or FOPs, as we like to abbreviate them, just know that you do not have to write each example here. So please write the 4 categories, the definitions of each category, and then maybe 1 or 2 examples, ones that will help you remember, or maybe an example that you didn't think of that'll spark something in your memory. So the first category we have land, defined as gifts of nature. These are natural resources. So obviously the land itself you can build things on, and that's a resource. There's also things that are produced on land. So timber grown on land, any crops that you could grow. So we have silk, cotton, other crops that count here. But you can also use the land, maybe drill underground and get gasoline, natural gas, oil, coal, any of those things would be land resources because they come from the land. You can also use water if there's streams or lake within your territory for fisheries, for the water itself, to grow things. If you build anything on the land, that counts as land resource. So if you build a shopping mall, that still goes within land. Next category is about labor. This could be skilled or unskilled. So labor is definitely going to be your resource that produces services. So you want to have a variety of skilled and unskilled or manual labor. The last 2 categories of factors of production are capital and entrepreneurship. So capital, it's very important here that you do write the part in bold below the example. Just wanted to put that out at the beginning. So capital, normally we think of tools. These are things that you can use to produce other things. The important distinction is that physical capital is what we're talking about here. So scissors, robots, cash register, computer systems, anything with networking that can help you build other things. If I give you a calculator, that could be a tool that you could use to be more productive in this class. That's all physical capital. That is not the same as financial capital or money. Believe it or not, money does not count anywhere as a factor of production, even though factors of production are resources. The definition is that they are things that are used to produce other things. And you don't actually use money to produce anything. Not unless you are making your dollar bill, you're folding it into some piece of origami and trying to sell that. Because otherwise, you use money to purchase these other resources. You're using it to pay workers, to buy a storefront, to buy machinery and tools for them. That's all physical capital there. That would be a factor of production. Money does not count. Not a factor of production. Just wanted to make that very important distinction for you. The last category is entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurs are people that tend to use the other categories, the other factors of production. That's what FOP stands for, in new ways. So maybe they are inventors and they are finding a new innovative way to do something that's never been used before. Maybe they're inventing a new product, or maybe just using something differently. They're deciding that, we need a store that does this, and that's innovative all by itself. Maybe no one ever focused on that thing before. So we have some examples here. The first picture of the guy in the turtleneck, that is Steve Jobs. He is the Apple creator. And then Henry Ford invented the Model T, so the first automobile. And to the right, we have Mark Zuckerberg. He started Facebook. So we have some new inventions, some new technologies that are using labor and physical capital to create other goods. Because of scarcity, economies have to figure out what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce goods. So this focuses on what goods are produced, who the consumers are going to be. Are you going to dictate what sort of jobs people can have, or do they have freedom of choice? There's a lot of variety within these choices. So we're going to look at 4 different types of economy. First, you all see command economies. Command economies are what the name sounds like. The government has complete control. So the government is the group that decides what is produced, how they're going to produce it, who's allowed to buy it, etc. So some examples in the real world of command economies are North Korea and Cuba. You might think that China would fit in this one, but China is actually going to be an example on the mixed economy side, where they used to be more command, but it's changed a little bit. The next example here is traditional economy, and again, the name sounds like what it is. Traditional economies are not really focused on strong government control. They decide what is produced and how it's produced based on what has always been done. So the examples here: Inuits, you might think of Eskimos, this is a group in Alaska and Canada, and then subsistence farmers. A subsistence farmer is someone that grows just what they need to subsist or to sustain their family. So you're growing just enough to live off of, maybe trade with your neighbors, but you're not growing it just for the sale purpose. There will be 2 more examples on the next slide. The next 2 types of economies are market economies and mixed economies. When you hear market economies, we're talking about the free market. And you're going to learn later this year about supply and demand and how consumers and producers decide what they're going to make if they're a producer, that's going to be the supply side, or what they want to buy if they're consumers, that's the demand side. So that's going to make up the market. The idea is if a market is a free market, then the government is not involved in determining what's made, what's produced, who's able to buy it. Then the market itself decides it. So New Zealand is an example of a pure market economy with much less government intervention. You see here the United States is listed with an asterisk. After this slide, you're going to pause and think about whether you think that the United States counts as a pure market economy or not. Do individual businesses get to decide what they're making, or is the government involved in that decision? The last category is mixed economy, because there's lots of countries around the world that are not purely command, traditional, or market. There's something in between. So go ahead and take a moment and write down your opinion to whether or not you think the United States counts as a market economy. We'll talk about the consensus on the next slide. So hopefully you answered the question on whether or not you think the U.S. counts as a market economy or a mixed economy. So, in terms of what economists think, the US is primarily a market economy. We really tend to view most world economies as part of a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum is command economies, on one end is market economies. So we saw that a place like Cuba is a pure command economy, and New Zealand is a pure market economy, and most countries are somewhere in between, including America. So we're on the market side of the spectrum, but we're not completely a free market economy. The government has a lot of power in terms of taxing businesses and regulating businesses. Just because you want to have a business that produces meth, you're not allowed. The government says that there's some things that can't be produced because we have laws against them. There's also laws about environmental regulations, safety regulations. So the government does have a lot of oversight involved in what's produced and also who is allowed to produce. There are certain things that you have to be a certain age to buy or that you can't buy at all. That's why we're on the side of market economy, so we're not purely a market economy. I told you before that China used to be, when it was communist, fully in terms of their economy, they were on the command side. But now there's a little bit more freedom, and there are some entrepreneurs that are deciding to set up their own businesses, not purely controlled by the government. So they would be on the command side of the spectrum, but not purely command either. Okay, so we're switching gears a little bit and talking about some 5 key assumptions. This is going to be things that we look at all year long. Economies are actually quite complicated, so we have to make assumptions about them in order to study them. If you were in college, this would be macroeconomics 101, kind of an introductory level. And assumptions are ways of simplifying things that we can actually localize certain variables and learn from them. So the first assumption is that society's wants are unlimited, but all resources are scarce. We talked about this earlier with the idea of scarcity, and that we always want more than our resources are able to give. And this is going to lead us into 2 more terms you're going to learn: trade-offs and opportunity costs. So assumption number 2 is about trade-offs. Due to scarcity, we have to make choices. Because you only have so much money, because you only have so much time, because we only have so much land, we have to decide how to use these resources. Anything that you're unable to do, all of these things that we're saying no to, those are going to be our trade-offs. Third assumption is that people are all self-interested, meaning that you all have your own personal motive. We want to maximize our satisfaction. So on the micro level, people are deciding things that are best for them. Businesses are also deciding things that are going to be best for their company. Macro level, governments are supposed to be making decisions based on what's best for their self-interest. Now, it's true that any of these actors might sometimes make irrational choices and do things that we weren't expecting. But in order for us to make these assumptions, we're assuming that everyone is acting rationally in terms of their own self-interest. Assumption number 4, you're going to learn these terms today as well, about marginal costs and marginal benefits. Marginal things are small. You learn that word aggregate, which is overall or total, these big decisions. So if you think about it, aggregate is opposite of marginal. So we're going to look at all of these decisions in terms of marginal costs and marginal benefits. Anything that you gain by that small choice is a marginal benefit, and what you lose is a marginal cost. And we're assuming that there's always going to be pros and cons to every decision. And finally, there's going to be a lot of economic models that you're going to learn this year. So the 5th assumption is that real life situations can be explained through these simplified models. So we're going to try to only look at the variables that we're studying in terms of it'll help us figure out what's going to happen to prices, inflation, unemployment, interest rates, and we can make guesses based on behavior looking at these models. When we were talking about assumptions, I explained that we need to simplify the economy. We need to simplify the world in order to look at it and see how, if this one thing changes, if oil prices fall, how will that affect something else? So when we look at a simplified example, we can start making models. So economists love economic models. It helps them see only one change and how it will affect the economy as a whole. There's this Latin term, ceteris paribus. It is going to be one of your vocab words in Module 1. That's the idea that all other things equal. We're going to have to assume that the only thing that's changing in the economy is what we just mentioned. So if I said oil prices fell, we have to assume that that is the only thing that changed, that all other things are equal. If oil prices fell and we were also bombed that week, that's going to throw off our economy quite a bit. And if there's a riot, and if this is overthrown, and maybe there's a hurricane, we really can't keep going into these unlimited what ifs, because that will make the economy way too cloudy and we won't be able to learn anything from it. So we have to just simplify down to one thing. The picture here, you have a paper airplane. Clearly, this is not actually an airplane, but it's a simplified model of an airplane. And it's going to show us a little bit about how planes fly, how air goes under the wings, but it's clearly simplified and not a full airplane. We're quite aware that these models are very basic, but in order to look at one effect, they're great. We learned the word marginal before, and marginal means small. The margins of your paper are just the outside of the paper. It's not the entire piece of paper. So if you change the margins, you're only changing a small percentage, not the entire thing. That's why the word marginal, small, is opposite from aggregate, which is overall and total. In economics, we're going to look at marginal benefits and marginal costs. Marginal benefits are the small benefit you gain by your action. So if you decide to produce one more t-shirt, what is the benefit? This is not the same as saying you decide to open up a t-shirt shop. That's a much bigger effect. That'll be aggregate. Marginal is just that one benefit from the one additional unit that you produce. At the same time, each decision also has a marginal cost. So if you decide to produce one more t-shirt, what is the cost? So maybe you make $2 in profit, that's your marginal benefit. And you'll have to figure out how much it costs you in labor, and that would be your marginal cost. You want to only do things where the marginal benefit outweighs the marginal cost. In production, it's very easy to do the math, but we're going to see in the next slide how you can use these economic ways of thinking to apply to everyday life. So consumers also have to think about marginal benefits and costs. We were looking before from the production side, you produce one t-shirt, but consumers also think this way. So if you buy a new pair of jeans, there might be a marginal benefit to you. Now this might not be financial. We can think economically in ways that aren't just about money. So maybe there's the satisfaction that you gain from that new pair of jeans, and if you feel like that satisfaction is more beneficial to you than the cost that you paid, then it's a worthwhile decision. If it means that it's now your 29th pair of jeans, that might not add a whole lot to your life. And so in that case, the marginal benefit might be less than the marginal cost. So the key idea here is that from a production or a consumer consumption point of view, as long as the marginal benefit is bigger than the marginal cost, you should do it. It is profitable, it makes sense, it's an economically sound thing to do. If the marginal cost is bigger, you shouldn't do it. You're going to actually lose more than you gain. So not a very smart thing to do. So you can also think about it in terms of time, because remember, time is a resource that you have as well. So is there a marginal benefit that you gain from 1 hour of exercise? Well, what's the marginal cost? What's the trade-off? What can't you do now because you chose to make that choice? Same thing if you decide to spend 1 hour studying. You're going to gain benefits from that hour, but you're also going to lose the ability to do other things. So when you're thinking about managing your time or your money, you're making these decisions on the margin, thinking small scale. If I spend 1 hour, if I spend $10 doing this thing or buying this thing, will it be worth it to me? Did my marginal benefit exceed my marginal cost? So now we're going to practice trade-offs and opportunity costs in real life. So this is just an introduction. This doesn't go anywhere in your notes, but I wanted us to see how if you decide to visit your friend for a week, they live somewhere that you have to fly to their location. So we're going to actually compare 3 different flights. And the assumption is that you work every weekday earning $100 per day. So we're going to go through each option and we're going to look at marginal benefits, marginal costs, and then overall the net dollar amount to see which one is the best decision. So just looking at these three options, Thursday night, Friday early morning, and Friday night, and the prices, which one do you think you would choose? All right, now let's test it. Let's go through and see which one is the best. So as you can see, I've done the math for you here. So we have MB, which stands for marginal benefit, MC for marginal cost, and then net, that is when you're going to take the benefit, subtract the cost, and see what we end up with. So the marginal benefits will always be positive. You're gaining that amount. Marginal cost will always be negative. So to figure out the marginal benefit for the first flight, we looked at how much money are you saving. So we're going to look at $275 compared to the most expensive option, $325. You can subtract it. So $325, most expensive, minus our choice, $275. The benefit is $50. The cost of deciding to fly Thursday night is that you can't work Friday. You're going to lose 1 day's pay. And we saw before that you earn $100 per day. So the marginal cost of that flight is negative $100. And then the benefit, 50, minus the cost, 100, gives us the net, negative $50. Okay, the next option, Friday early morning. So go ahead and think if you can figure it out. How much are you saving, marginal benefit? How much does it cost you, marginal cost, and then overall, what money will you be left with? So go ahead and try to figure out Friday early morning by yourself. All right, let's see. So Friday marginal benefit. You save $25 because it is $25 less than the most expensive option, but you lose $100 because we still can't work on Friday if you're taking the Friday early morning flight. So your net for Friday early morning is negative $75, the benefit minus the cost. And then Friday night flight, last one, the benefit is that you get to work on Friday. So you gain that $100. The cost to you is that it's $50 more than the cheapest option. $325 minus $275 equals $50. So the net there is positive $50. So even though it's the most expensive flight, when you're looking at it in terms of what are you gaining and losing in terms of not just the flight, but can you work that day, that actually is the best choice. Okay, so one really important economic idea is about trade-offs and opportunity costs. All of these choices that we make on a daily basis come with trade-offs. We can't have everything that we want. There's always alternatives. So if you're deciding between buying a new car or a used car, whatever choice you make is going to have trade-offs. If you decide a new car, there's of course marginal benefits. Maybe you have less maintenance, it's more reliable, and you have the satisfaction of having that new car smell. So we have, of course, financial and also intangible benefits, benefits that might not have a dollar amount but are still worth something to you. But also trade-offs. You're probably spending a lot more money on a new car. Your car taxes are going to be higher. You're going to be paying more in car insurance if the car is of a higher value. If you decide to go with a used car, you're gaining a lower payment, lower taxes, that sort of thing, but you're also having trade-offs. Maybe your car's in the shop more often and it's less reliable. So all of the things that you're not getting are your trade-offs. If you're deciding what to do with your time, do you want to go out and see your friends or do you want to study? There's benefits that you would get from each of those choices, but whatever choice you make, you're giving something up. So trade-offs come with good things and bad things. There's often a long number of things that you could be doing, that you could be buying with your money. So if you had a $100 raise, there's an unlimited amount of things that you could do with that $100. You'll probably just pick one, and all the things that you decide not to do, those are all your trade-offs. So on the last slide, we learned about trade-offs. Opportunity costs and trade-offs go hand in hand, and these are often very confusing for students because they seem similar at first. Trade-offs are unlimited. There's a lot of things that you could be doing with your time or you could be doing with your money. So normally trade-offs are going to be plural. There will be multiple choices, whereas opportunity costs, this is the number one thing that you are not doing. So opportunity is not every single thing that you're not doing. Opportunity cost is the best thing you're not doing. So if you decide to study for an hour after school, think of all of the things that you could have done instead. All of those things are your trade-offs. The one that you regret the most that you weren't able to do, that's your opportunity cost. So sometimes these things don't have dollar amounts attached to them. It's just based on personal satisfaction and what you value higher. But they could also be financial things that you could take. Maybe you're given 3 different job offers. One of them is $7 an hour, one is $8 an hour, one is $9 an hour. If you take the $9 an hour job, your opportunity cost is not 7 plus 8 because you can't have both of those other 2 jobs instead. If you chose the $9 job, your opportunity cost is the $8 job. It's the best thing that you gave up in order to make that choice. We'll practice another example with numbers on the next slide. Now we have a word problem practicing opportunity cost. So here's your example. A student chooses to study economics for 1 hour after school. In that hour, he could have worked at the grocery store for $10 per hour or mowed his grandmother's yard for $20. Is the opportunity cost of choosing to study $10, $20, or $30? The answer is $20. So it is not possible in that same 1 hour to do both. You can't work at the grocery store and mow your grandmother's yard simultaneously. You have to choose. So the best thing that that student is not able to do would be mowing the yard for $20. So go ahead and take the opportunity to work on the examples in your notes. They ask you about TV and also choices about college. So think about the difference between trade-offs and opportunity cost. A little hint, one of them will have multiple answers, one of them will only have one to make sure that you know the difference. You learned a lot of vocabulary words in Module 1, so this is a graphic organizer to try to see the relationships between each of these terms. So we're starting with the idea that in all societies and all economies, even in your own life, there are limited resources. And remember the vocab word we learned, factors of production. So we have these limited resources but unlimited wants. That leads us to the idea of scarcity. Because of scarcity, we have to make choices, and all of the choices come with trade-offs. All of the things that you're not able to do if you decide to choose one option. And remember, when we're looking at trade-offs, we're going to be thinking of marginal benefits and marginal costs. Finally, the best thing that you're not doing, the number one thing that you're giving up, kind of the number one trade-off, is called the opportunity cost. So hopefully this helps keep all of these terms straight.